A chart by itself is great for creating a visual representation of data, and even though Excel creates great looking charts just from clicking the single chart button, there are many different formats and configurable options on a chart that will make it stand out that much more. In this lesson, we're going to look at many of the formatting options available to us in Excel 2010. So let's go to the Build Chart worksheet and use the column chart that we built in an earlier exercise. For some reason it's not there, we can build a new one. Simply pause now if you need to recreate the chart. It was a column chart with the calendar days across the bottom, and each store represented a data series. For those of you that want to walk through it again, all we have to do is click on one cell in our chart, go to the Charts menu, and then click the columns and choose Clustered Columns. And Excel will create a very basic, simple clustered column chart right there on our worksheet. So one of our first formatting options may not even feel like formatting, but it really is. We're going to move our chart to its own dedicated chart page. Click on the chart, make sure it's active, and then right click on the chart and go down to the Move Chart command. Now right here you see that Excel is showing us that right now the chart is an object in the Build Chart worksheet. We could move it to another worksheet, or we can move it to its own dedicated chart sheet. This won't have any other information, won't have any of the data or the cells associated with it. Let's name that Chart Formatting and click OK. Well, now that our chart is on its own dedicated chart sheet, let's really look at the formatting options. We looked at a couple of these a little bit in the last lesson, but we want to go over to the right side of the chart sheet and look at all the chart styles that are available to us. Now you see the first column of chart styles that we have are basically going to be black and white styles, and these would be best if you had a printer that couldn't print out color naturally. The next column has several different colors, pretty much a different color for every data series in your chart. It has a couple different two-dimensional looking options to start with, and then when you get to the third and fourth rows you have more of a three-dimensional effect, and that can look really sharp in a presentation. The last row contains charts that have a black background. Now these look really sharp in a presentation or in a dark room or just sending over and looking on your computer. They don't print out real well though. They take up too much black on the paper. So again, it comes down to what message you're trying to communicate and who's going to be watching it. The rest of the chart styles are kind of just similar version. You have a different color, but it's a different shade of the same color for each data series. And you go through all the different colors, the blue, the red, the green, purple, a couple others. But we'll stick with a simple multicolor two-dimensional look to look at our formatting options. After you've chosen your basic style, you can go over and look at some of the quick layout options, and these will take some of the main chart elements and put them in ways that we've already determined are useful in charting. The first one will add a chart title. Then we take the grid lines off and show data labels on top of each of the data series bars. It shows the actual values. Then we put the grid lines back, don't have the data labels. Again, many different options, and it just gives you an opportunity to look at different ways to display your data, and it again depends on what message you're trying to communicate. We'll start with the last one here that doesn't have any data labels. It has a legend and it has a date on the bottom but no title. So if we've gotten to a point where we've got our style picked out and our quick layouts, but we want even further customization, we're in luck because we can pretty much customize anything on this chart. So from here we'll go over to the chart layout ribbon and we'll look at some of these options that we have. We have chart title, chart axis, a legend, data labels, data table, axis, grid lines. Let's start just with the chart title. Click on that, and right now we have no chart title. We can add a chart title above the chart, and that will push down the entire chart area to make room for a title. You can have it overlap. Then you could also go into the chart title options and look at all the different customizations you have. You have a font section where you can change everything about the font, from the color to the effects, a strike through, a double strike through, caps, all caps. The actual text box, you can change some formatting options of that because this chart title is essentially a text box. Then we can go to the fill command, and that will fill a color within the chart title, the line around the edges. Put any shadow effects, glow or soft edges or 3D format. Well, I'll go ahead and click OK here because that's showing you many of the options. Just to show you that while the chart is selected, we can go over to the Format tab under Chart and see all of those very same options. We have a quick way to format that chart title. We can click right here and give it a better look to make it stand out a little bit more, depending on what you want it to look like. You could customize the fill in the line and the effects from this ribbon just like you could in that dialog box. You can have a level of transparency to that in case it was meant to be over something. You can see through it. Put some different text styles on things. Now, these options are going to be available to about every element in this chart. The reason I say that is everything on this chart is actually an element. This is your data. These are your data series. These are grid lines right here. It's a plot area. Whatever you're on, you can customize using this format ribbon. Let's go back to chart layout and let's look at another thing. Let's look at the legend. Now the legend is basically the area over here that tells you what the data series is. Blue is going to be all my Brooklyn stores, red is Manhattan stores, and green is the Queen stores. Let's see what my legend choices are. Start off, I can have no legend. I could have the legend at the right like I did. I could have it at the top. Okay, now I've got a little overlap with the title. I'd have to play with that, so that wouldn't be ideal. I could put it at the bottom. Now that looks pretty good. The legend at the bottom shows me what data series is blue, red, and green. And then if I go to format, I have all those same options that I had before. Maybe I want to make that legend stand out a little more, so maybe I can give it a little outline. And now it stands out a little bit more. Now, one of the things I want to point out is I've talked about a couple different elements. I talked about a chart title and a legend. One of the things about charts is they're made up of a number of different elements, if you will. And it can be confusing, and if you get a little lost, maybe you think you're going to make, maybe you're looking at your legend, you want to make it a red, button popped out. You had the wrong element activated. You had the title activated when you should have had the legend. Well, there's a way to determine what you're working with because it can get really easy with charts to modify the wrong thing. You always want to click what you're going to work on first naturally, but when you do, up in this chart layout and the format ribbons, you have a current selection box over here. And right now it says my current selection is the legend. So that means whatever I do next is going to apply to the legend. If I want to go on the title, you can click on the title. Now it says chart title. Now I can go back to the legend. If I click over here, you can see I'm on the horizontal category axis. If I click here, I'm on the vertical axis. Click here, I'm on the vertical axis, major grid lines. So you can pretty much click on anything. If I click in the middle here, I end up in what's called the plot area of the chart. And that's just the entire area within the X and Y axis. If I click outside that, I'm in the chart area of the chart. And those are all different. So it's really important to be aware of this current selection drop down here. Because you may think you're on one thing and you'll end up being on another. Let's go back to the plot area and we can show you here. If we did a fill of the plot area, maybe we make it a light teal. You see how it just filled the plot area? Now I can go out to the chart area and I can do a fill on that as well. And that could be maybe a medium shade of red. And now you see I've got the chart area and the plot area are different colors. They have different formats. And then again, that all comes back to looking at this current selection box. Now we could say too that I don't want to click on it. I know what element I want to modify. I can also use that drop down in the current selection to go right to the chart title. And then I could modify that to look however I wanted it to. So while we're there, let's just look at a couple of the elements that are used often for formatting. The first one is the chart title naturally. Then I can go to my chart area, and that's the area outside the plot area. I'm going to go ahead and make that a no fill again. And then you also have the plot area. I'm going to click down here and go to my plot area. That's the area where the data is actually plotted. It's interior to the X and Y axis. I'll take that fill off as well. Then you have the X and Y axis. Here's X and here's Y. I can click on those. I've got my vertical axis and I've got my horizontal axis. Now some of the formatting options do change slightly based on what you click on, but most of the things are the same. You have a fill, you have effects, some common styles for whatever element that is. You can align things differently. So one more thing we're going to look at in this lesson is the data labels. If you click on data labels, what you're going to see is right now we have no data labels. We can add the value of that, the series name, or the category name. Now I added the value, so the value shows on top of each individual data series. I can have the series name there instead, Manhattan. You have the category name, then that is the actual date. That kind of doesn't make sense because it's right on top of the date, but just going through the options. Then you can actually have a different place to place it. Let's go back and give it the value. And by default on a column chart, it's on top of every column, but you can also have it inside the column. You can have it at the base of the column, right at the very beginning. You have the center of the column. And so there's many different options for all these. And if you look through these different items, the axis titles, you have different options for where that's going to be. We're going to go over the data table in another lesson. Then you have the axis, the horizontal and the X. You can have it go from left to right or right to left and have an axis without labels. Same with vertical. You have some different choices here. You can have the axis in thousands, millions, billions. And this is just good if you have very large numbers in your axis. You don't want to display all that. So we're just kind of giving a quick overview of how to change all the other formatting aspects of the chart. Again, you can start off on the simple end and just choose the predefined styles or layouts. Then you can go in to each of the individual elements and change pretty much whatever you want. Charts are a really great tool for analyzing data, and there's something powerful about seeing a trend graphically rather than looking at a progression of numbers. While Excel's charting and formatting capabilities are basically limitless, it is fun to experiment with all these settings, but remember that simple is usually better. If you're trying to emphasize a point, then make that data point stand out. But don't make that chart so full of crazy formatting that the last thing people see is the content or the story you're trying to tell.